Okay, back on tape here, moments later. Film, whatever you want to call it. So, George's, I'm maybe going a little out of order here. I'm just kind of going on memory as to, I don't know chronological order of air dates. I'm not that much of a Twilight Zone nerd, and maybe that's a good thing. So, I'll hit on all of them, but don't quote me on the air dates or that I'm doing these in chronological order. I'm only doing them approximately. Okay, so the next one's really, now, once we hit George's third episode, now we really start to see the man and the writer. You know, the first two were done by Rod, teleplays by Rod, and now we're seeing George in full force and full bloom. So I'll start by talking about A Game of Pool and Nothing in the Dark and Kick the Can, which I think were really his three masterpieces. And he always said, whenever I want to show anybody my best work that I've ever done, he said, I'll pull out and show them those three scripts. And he was full of bragging rights with all three of them. So to talk about each one individually without really recapping too much of the stories, which everybody knows, A Game of Pool was the old classic tale of the, as George said, the old gunfighter who now is challenged by the younger one. And George wanted the story to end with the younger one losing the game. Jack Klugman playing Jesse Cardiff. Excuse me. And he wanted Jesse to lose the game to Fats Brown, played by Jonathan Winters. And that's how George conceived it. But it was changed. And he said at the time it was changed, we were off in Missouri, the wilds of Missouri, filming Charles Beaumont's film The Intruder with William Shatner. And Buck Houghton called him and said, we're changing the ending. You know, it's a wonderful script, but we're changing the ending. And we're going to have Jesse win the game. Well, George didn't like it, but Hollywood being Hollywood, you know, they did it. And I think it really could have gone either way. I don't think there was anything wrong with the change. And I think, then again, having Jesse lose the game, having Jack Klugman lose the game, it could have really gone either way. And it's up to the viewer really to decide who's better. But throughout this whole script, you know, needless to say, this whole thing takes place in a, you know, simple set, a pool room, pool tables. And they got some damn good photography and shots of everything, and the dialogue is just wonderful. And, you know, those who kind of knew Jonathan Winters as the comedian that he was, although I never thought he was really that funny. He was talented, but I think he was really more dramatically talented than he was comedically when all is said and done, but that's just my opinion. And then Jack Klugman, I mean, second to none. I mean, who was better than him? Who could do parts like him? He could do anything, and he was brilliant in everything that he did. If he was in it, it was 100 times better. I can never say enough good things about that guy, and I wish I had met him in my Twilight Zone travels, because I really would like to have. But he was not all that egregious. He didn't like going to conventions, and I don't blame him. I don't blame him at all. But needless to say, that was A Game of Pool, and I think that was really that's the favorite episode that George wrote for a lot of people, including myself. And then moving on to Nothing in the Dark. Now, George was only about 30 years old when he wrote that script. And I don't think he ever thought or dreamt that Robert Redford, who was really kind of an unknown then, just kind of getting going, would appear in something of his. Nor did he envision someone like Dame Gladys Cooper appearing in something of his. But they were, thanks to the casting of director Lamont Johnson, who was also one of Twilight Zone's best directors. And so this is a story about, you know, about death and dying. And once in a while, Twilight Zone would do a story about that. They did it with One for the Angels in the first season, and they did it again with the Grandfather Clock episode, which was also George's story in the last season. I'll talk about that one later. And so this is a story about a woman who refuses to die. She's had a good life, but she doesn't want to die. Well, now she's kind of impoverished. She lives in the basement of this building. It doesn't even look like it has any windows left, but she does not want to leave it. And then in comes this contractor, played by R.G. Armstrong, who was a tremendously good actor as well, who comes in and says, you know, this building is going to be condemned within the next hour. It's not even going to be here. Get your things together and make arrangements to go. I'll help you. And she said, no, I won't. I don't want to die. And then, of course, Robert Redford is there as Mr. Death, and he talks to her and placates her and gets her to the point where she is ready to make the transition, and she does. And she just cannot believe her eyes at how uneventful it was. So it was very, very, very touching, and always will be. But you wonder about, Rod Serling wrote about death. They all did. But somebody like George writing about death, I mean, he was the one to do it. He really knew how to make this thing work. And of course, he always said the writers were words on paper, but we had these outstanding actors and directors, really, who brought it to a new level. Kick the Can, also an old age story, done in the third season. And Kick the Can starred Ernest Truex and a bunch of older actors. And also Ernest Truex's son, Barry Truex, makes an appearance. And I actually worked with a guy a long time ago who was friends with Barry Truex. And I don't know if Barry's still with us now, but he said, yeah, he said, my wife and I were very good friends with him, and we knew how great an actor his dad was. And I said, oh, I certainly know Ernest Truex. And I had told this, I usually didn't talk about, and I don't in this day and age, talk about Twilight Zone at work, but at this very first job that I had in LA, I did spill the beans and told them about my conventions, the conventions that I'd organized, and the books that I'd written, and my website and stuff. And this man, an older man at that time, he said, yeah, you're involved in Twilight Zone. Do you know a guy named Barry Truex? And I said, no, I don't know him, but I know of him, and I know he was in one of the episodes. So anyway, cutting to the chase and beyond, Kick the Can was remade in Twilight Zone, the movie. And it was just such a good enough segment in the original to be remade later. Now, the Twilight Zone, the movie, gets all kinds of, a bad rap. A lot of people don't like it, but guess what? A lot of people do. And I think the casting of Scatman Carruthers in it was perfect. And if I'm not mistaken, Scatman Carruthers also appeared on Twilight Zone, the revamped series in the 80s. And I think wasn't he in, please forgive me if I'm wrong, but wasn't he in Paladin of the Last Hour? Or is it Paladin of the Lost Hour? I'm sorry. I don't know what I'm talking about here. I just wing it. I just come in and wing it. I don't know anything about Twilight Zone. But I believe he was in either that one or one of the ones in the 80s. I know Danny Kaye starred in Paladin of the Lost Hour. It's a story about older men, or two older men. Anyway, and where's Paladin from? That's from Have Gun Will Travel. So anyway, this story, Kick the Can, as written by George in the early 60s and produced in the early 60s. It's about this guy who just wants to go back, this guy, Charles Whitley, who wants to go back in time and play Kick the Can again with the kids. And they've got these kids who make a racket outside the nursing home. They're playing, Kick the Can, all these years later. And nowadays, kids don't play Kick the Can. Kids do Nintendo, and they're on their phones, and they stay indoors, and they don't socialize with any other kids. And the few who are out there and socializing, they socialize in a different way. They text each other, and they don't even, the art of good communication is lost. But Kick the Can was still sort of a thing in the 1960s. And I suppose Charles Whitley grew up in the 1910s, or probably long before that, in the early 1900s, like the turn of the 20th century, let's say. So, long story short, Charles Whitley is contending with this guy played by Russell Collins. What is his name? Ben Conroy, is that his name? And Ben is telling him, Charles, your bones are going to break if you go out there and try to, overexert yourself. And of course, Charles Whitley, he doesn't care. He just wants to, he wants to play Kick the Can again. And this really turned into, I think it's one of the most really remembered episodes of the series. A lot of people really know Kick the Can better than a game of pool and Nothing in the Dark. So, the ending, it just unexpectedly packs a real wallop. And all these residents from the nursing home, all the old folks. And again, George is a guy in his early 30s writing about something like this, but it just worked so amazingly well. And I think it was because of how well directed it was, too. In the middle of the night, all of these old residents go back and start playing kick the can, leaving the crotchety Mr. Conroy, played by Russell Collins. He doesn't go back, and they go back to their childhood. They morph into and turn into these kids. They become kids again. And it's like, you wouldn't think, I mean, the episode kind of up to that point is a little bit on the corny side. It's a little bit long-winded. But then it's like, it's kind of a tearjerker. You see all of them becoming kids again, and you never thought it was coming. So, magic from the pen of none other than George Clayton Johnson. And another one done in the third season, I believe it was. Maybe the second, maybe the third. I'm not quite exactly sure without looking at it. Was his story for The Prime Mover. The Prime Mover. So The Prime Mover was credited to Charles Beaumont, but it was based on George's short story. And in the story, he has this guy, Jimbo Cobb, who has the uncanny ability to flip things over. Okay, all right. Again, a really kind of simple idea taken to the next level. So he's able to flip things, and he owns and works in a diner alongside his partner, Ace Larson, played by Dane Clark. And Ace Larson suggests, you can flip things over. How do you do it? I said, I don't know, I just think about it. So flipping things over, you can flip dice over. We need to go to Vegas. And meanwhile, there's this third character in the mix. The small casts were always better on Twilight Zone, as I've said before. This is a small cast, very unobtrusive, quiet little story, but doing big things. So the third character is played by Chris White, who everybody knows from Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, playing Kitty, dressed down and very simple, modest, and she's a waitress in this diner. And she wants to marry Ace, but she doesn't want to marry a gambler. So they go off to Vegas, and she said, "Are you guys going to Vegas?" She said, "Well, goodbye then. I don't want anything to do with you." And ultimately, it's Jimbo who convinces Ace, you can't pass up a woman like Kitty. She's too good to lose, So, long story short, they go to Vegas, win big, lose it all to these gamblers who really know what they're doing. And for a while they're on top of the gamblers who the gamblers stay with them and keep betting and betting and betting until they're at the max, and then predictably they lose it all to these thugs who take all their money. So they come back home penniless, and it's like, well, life isn't so bad penniless as long as you have love. Again, George Clayton Johnson and his rather simple ideas made great. So I'll go into the third and final video to talk about the rest of his episodes and share a couple of stories about George, a couple more stories about him.